Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 39, the Appropriation Act 1986. This being a mini bill, Her Honour, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Speaker, this legislation, of course, is the Appropriation Act to proceed with the capital funding for universities and colleges, as has been discussed in estimates.
The Honourable Provincial Treasurer has moved first reading of Bill number 39, the Appropriation Alberta Capital Fund Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Agreed. Opposed? Carried.
A bill being Appropriation Alberta Capital Fund Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mr. Johnston, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 48, the Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 1986. This being a money bill, Mr. Speaker, Her Honour, the Honourable Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the bill provides for an 8% increase in pensions paid under the Workers' Compensation Act. This timely, responsive increase, Mr. Speaker, provides for an increase in the monthly minimum pension payment from $675 to $730, as well as an increase in payments to dependent children from $139 to $150 per month.
The Honourable Minister of Community and Occupational Health has moved first reading of Bill number 48, Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mr. Dinning, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 267, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill would amend the act to provide for an annual adjustment in the province's minimum wage to take inflation into account. Inflation adjusted minimum wages would take effect on July 1st of every year in which inflation adjustment was warranted. 1981 would be the base year from which future inflation adjustments would be calculated.
The honourable member for Edmonton Belmont has moved first reading of Bill 267, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act. Does the Assembly agree to this motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being an act to amend the Employment Standards Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Sigurdsson is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to file with the Legislature Library 4 copies of the Gas Alberta Operating Fund financial statements for the period March 31, 1986.
Mr. Speaker, I have 2 reports to table today. The 1985 annual review of the Alberta Gaming Commission and the 13th annual report for the fiscal year ended March 31st, 1986 of the Alberta Law Foundation.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the 13th annual report of the Alberta Educational Communications Corporation for the year ended March 31st, 1986, as required by statute.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure today to introduce 3 guests through you and through you to the members of the Legislature. 2 of these gentlemen are from Edmonton and 1 is from Calgary, in fact, the constituency of Calgary-McCall. I'd like to introduce Joshua Mohanraj, Thomas Mohanraj, and Philip Clark. They are here visiting us today to see how the House does its business. I'd just like to ask them to rise and receive a cordial welcome of the Legislature.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly a very dear friend named Tom Brown, who has been a great servant of the people of Banff. Tom served for a number of years as a member of the Banff Advisory Council, has driven a bus many, many hundreds of thousands of miles, and he is accompanied today by his family from Aberdeen, Scotland, James and Ella Brown, and his friend Lorna Surgener from Edmonton. I hope they would rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly Mr. Wallace Daly, who's the president of the Alberta Association of Municipal Districts and Counties, and he's also a member of the Labour Legislation Review Committee. Plus, he's a neighbor of mine and a good friend. Mr. Wallace Daly, I'd ask him to rise in the members' gallery and receive the cordial welcome of the Assembly.
Introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly visitors from Ontario, Mr. and Mrs. Rhinus and their son Brian and their grandson. They're visiting our fair province. I'd like to wish them a warm welcome of the House, if they would please rise.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, on July the 25th, during discussion of his estimates, the Minister confirmed that only 28% of the wells drilled in 1985 were inspected by the ERCB, and that a full 13.3% of those, or 325 wells, were found to be so seriously deficient in terms of either equipment or personnel trained to control a blowout that they had to be shut down. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister, especially given yet another tragic blowout over this past weekend. What steps has the Minister taken to improve the ability of ERCB to inspect more than 28% of the wells drilled?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member did raise in the House some time ago, I believe it was in the question period on July the 7th, questions related to the blowout report put out annually by the ERCB. And at that time, misled the House, however, not intentionally, I'm sure, with respect to painting a bleak picture as to the work of the ERCB. However, Mr. Speaker, The ERCB, in issuing its annual report, outlined its inspection record, and this is an inspection record with respect to drilling wells as opposed to well servicing. I think it's important to make that distinction, Mr. Speaker, because the unfortunate accident of the last few days was related to well servicing. And that with respect to drilling crews, that the record of the industry had improved substantially during 1985 over 1984, and high priority having been put on rig inspections. And with respect to rig inspections, again, another high priority placed on sour gas drilling. And the record in 1985 was substantially better than it was in 1984. There's always room for further improvement, Mr. Speaker, and the ERCB is working in that direction to try to improve its record each year.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It may have improved from 1984 to 85. That's not the point. But when we look at 13.3% of the wells inspected were seriously deficient, if we took that ratio to all wells drilled, instead of the 28% inspected, that could mean a full 1,130 wells could have been seriously deficient. My question is to the Minister, what assurances is the Minister able to give us that some 1,130 wells drilled last year were not in need of being shut down, or that 13% of wells drilled this year are not unsafe?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as indicated in that annual report, there were some 2,447 wells inspected as opposed to 2,018 of the previous year. And whenever deficiencies are found in the drilling rigs, is my understanding and recollection that the operations are stopped until the deficiencies are improved upon. As I mentioned earlier, the performance record is improving each year, but we always recognize that we need to do a better job. And earlier this year, in fact, back in February, we announced a joint government and industry plan to build a training center to be located near Edmonton, to be constructed by the ERCB. With respect to training crews, and in particular, the center will be developed to satisfy basic training needs in 3 areas, including well control. And at that particular center, there will be some 1,000 individuals each year put through the program to try to have well-trained people working on our rigs and well servicing in this province.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It's my understanding from the report, at least in the 1985 report, that the ERCB has 110 inspectors. If these staff were to inspect even half of all the existing oil and gas wells, they would have to inspect 384 wells each, or 1.5 per day. I would say that's an impossible task, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister, will the Minister be asking the ERCB to increase the number of inspectors employed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that the ERCB can't inspect every single well in the entire province. And however, in terms of staffing, we look at those needs annually during the course of our budget to see if we need to increase that. We have had a major inquiry through the Lodgepole inquiry, and that report came out with some 39 recommendations to for ERCB and others to follow up on to reduce the likelihood of accidents and blowouts in the future. And a great deal of follow-up has occurred with respect to those recommendations, including the one that I referred to with respect to the training procedures. And I expect to be receiving a report, I've asked for a report from the ERCB as to how they have followed up on the recommendations from the Lodgepole inquiry.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I hope that there's some speed to those following up on that sort of recommendations. But Specifically, could the minister, I know it has to do with servicing wells, and we've been talking about something slightly different here, but it ties into the RCMB, or the ERCB, not the RCMP yet, at least, anyhow. My question is, could the minister indicate if the rig near Edson that blew out was inspected recently by the ERCB, and if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to well servicing, the requirements for inspections are not the same as for inspecting drilling rigs. In fact, there is no need for a license for servicing rigs or approval for work to be done on a servicing rig. However, the ERCB does follow up on inspections as best they can in this particular area. And in this particular case, I don't have any indication that there was an inspection prior to the blowout. However, following the failure, the ERCB has been working very closely with the Community and Occupational Health jointly to follow up as to determine the cause of the blowout. And my colleague, the Minister of Occupational and Community Health, may wish to supplement my comments because due to the unfortunate deaths in this case, the Community and Occupational Health Division has taken a lead role in terms of investigating, but being assisted by the ERCB.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplemental, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy. Given his admission that the Energy Resources Conservation Board does not have enough inspectors to go around, and then also his admission that the only penalty is being shut down if they are found until they put something on. Can the minister assure the House that he will look over the regulations with the idea that there will be good and sufficient penalty for those that are caught with insufficient blow-up protection when they are drilling their wells?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, there are priorities in terms of the wells that the ERCB inspect, whether they be sour gas wells or whether they be wells drilled by companies or using equipment that have had a record not as good as others in the industry. So they do establish priorities in carrying out their inspection techniques. The business of inspectors, Mr. Speaker, I've addressed that previously in that on an annual basis, and recommendations from the ERCB and from the industry, we ascertain whether or not we have sufficient inspectors in the field, and through the budgetary process make our determination with respect to that. Certainly it's a concern every time we do have a blowout, and particularly when people are injured and lives are lost. And we intend to continue to put a high priority on safety in the industry, and the record of the ERCB in this province is unlike any other place in the world in terms of being first class. And however, that doesn't mean we can't improve, and we'll try to improve.
Member for Clover Bar.
Speaker, a supplementary question, and this is a supplement to what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asked as far as inspections. It's been brought to my attention, Mr. Minister, that because of tightening up of the budgetary process by the oil companies, that there seems to be a need for more inspection than there has been previously. Has that been brought to the Minister's attention? And if so, can he indicate that he will indicate to this legislature there will be more inspectors put in place?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's an important point, and with the annual report that I tabled into this House earlier in the year, it did in fact show a greater degree of inspection than the previous year. I don't have the numbers for 1986. I could get those numbers if the honourable member wishes. And but again, in terms of determining the number of people that are involved, that is something we review annually. I haven't had any requests that I recall in the last few months, particularly requesting more inspectors. I hesitate to say so, but based on memory, but it was my recollection that we had indeed increased the number of inspectors last year, but I say that subject to checking.
Second supplementary question, the member for Calgary Northwest.
A supplementary to the Minister of Occupational Health and Safety. Could the minister outline to us, since it's impossible to check every well, what sampling techniques they use and what the record this industry has in the province of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I was interested in interjecting on beside my colleague, the Minister of Energy, to suggest in response to what the leader of the Liberal Party had said about blowout preventers, and in the same vein, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I think it would be premature to be pointing a finger or laying blame at anyone's doorstep. We have a very tragic accident here, Mr. Speaker, and one that the Energy Resources Conservation Board and the Occupational Health and Safety Division of our department is taking a very careful look at, investigating it thoroughly, and we'll be coming back to the government with recommendations and with advice as to what happened, why it happened, and where corrective action is necessary. We will be taking that corrective action. But I can respond to the member for Calgary Northwest by saying that considering the kind of activity, the amount of activity that goes on in this province, our safety record, matched against any other jurisdiction in the world, is superior.
Second supplementary information, Minister of Energy, briefly.
Speaker, I think it's important to emphasize again, following up from the leader of the official opposition when he talked about the number of serious deficiencies, to point out that when serious deficiencies were identified, that in fact the drilling rigs were shut down until those deficiencies were remedied. So I think it's very important that we note that.
Supplementary, because that had nothing to do with my question. I wasn't even complaining about that. It was the ones that weren't looked after. But I'll direct my second question to the Minister of Labour, if I may. Mr. Speaker, after the long weekend, the Minister has been listening to public opinion as expressed through phone-in programs, letters to the editor, editorials, phone calls to MLAs. He will know that Albertans are quite offended by his law committee's plans to travel the world. And giving the minister one more chance, Mr. Speaker, will the minister now acknowledge this public sentiment in a reasonable way by agreeing to reconsider the decision to travel around the world with this committee?
Mr. Speaker, every aspect of this committee, its membership, the makeup of that membership, the parameters that it's functioning under, and the travel was given a tremendous amount of consideration before any decisions were made, and I doubt if I'm going to be reviewing any of those decisions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the answer doesn't surprise me at all, but I think Albertans will remember the answer. My question is, though, to try to figure out which countries we are going to, because it seems to be added on all the time. I'm told that they may be considering Sweden and even the charming mountains of Switzerland. My question is simply this: is it true that Sweden and Switzerland have been added to this world tour? And if not, are there any other countries being considered at this time?
No, Mr. Speaker, and no, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I should add that it would be wise if the member was to ask me the questions rather than relying on third-hand information.
Mr. Speaker, I thought you were the one across the way there. Maybe I misunderstood. You're not the Minister of Labour? But my question then is to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister really has spent half as much time thinking about the Alberta swing where the work will be done. Is the Minister able yet to provide any sort of detailed information yet on where the committee will hold public meetings in Alberta, what aspects of our legislation will be concentrated on, or how Albertans' opinions will be sampled?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see that they're waiting for the answer. The situation is that I've said in the House on many occasions in the past that we will have a full set of public meetings in Alberta, that we will at least go to Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Red Deer, probably Grand Prairie, and I would expect some place in east central Alberta in addition. But we're quite prepared to add to that itinerary if it is indicated by the responses that we get to the interim report that will be issued, I hope, sometime in November. The Honourable Leader got a little argumentative as well, and I think he's forgetting the purpose of this committee, and that is to have a full review of the legislation. If we are going to have that full review, we have to look at many aspects of the current legislation, and I think also that we should look at concepts in other jurisdictions, in all fairness to the people of Alberta. One has to put this in the context of the economic costs, and we know they are considerable, both to those who are involved in disputes and are out of work during the dispute and during a strike or lockout, and also to the employers, the owners of the companies, who of course frequently lose production during the same disputes. And I think if one looks at those economic matters alone, one can see the justification for a thorough review of the legislation.
Mr. Speaker, nobody's saying that we don't need a thorough review. That's what this whole session has been about. It's the world tour that we question, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the Minister and the Premier basically accused me of discrediting the committee. And I think that I've tried to offer some positive solutions about what should be done with this committee to make it credible. My question to the Minister, will the Minister not admit that it's this government's stubborn refusal to consult Labour and his committee's plans to travel the world which has seriously discredited the committee in the eyes of most Albertans?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the honourable member can say that we have not consulted or will not give Labour a chance to express their opinions. There are three members of organised Labour on the committee, highly respected representatives of organised Labour, and they will be representing all of organised Labour, not just the unions or the associations from which they come. The same applies to the representatives of management and the representatives of the general public. To suggest that this government is not interested in listening to Labour or consulting with Labour is patently ridiculous.
Supplementary question, West Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour, will he set aside a time, or is he at the freedom now to set the time by when members of the Alberta public organizations will be able to present briefs to this commission? Will it be before they do their travels abroad or afterward?
Mr. Speaker, as far as the committee is concerned, we'll receive written briefs at any time. I have suggested indeed that people should start, individuals and organizations should start preparing those briefs last month when I made the formal announcement of setting up the committee, on many occasions since. We will accept written briefs at this time. What I have also said is that I would seriously suggest that people who are preparing briefs also consider the interim report, which will present concepts from other jurisdictions and the comments of the committee on those concepts, and in that way we'll have briefs that address potential answers as well as just the problems.
Member for Little Bowl.
To the Minister of Labour. The Minister indicated there would be an interim report. The Minister indicate the date of that report and also, along with that, the date of the potential final report.
Mr. Speaker, I've tried to avoid giving exact dates because I don't know how long different parts of the process will take. But I am anticipating that the interim report will be made public sometime in November. I would hope mid-November. That's what I would aim for, but it will be sometime in November. And we will then be having public meetings around the province in December, and indeed they may spread into January. As I've said many times, the intention is to have any legislative changes introduced at the spring sitting of the 1987 legislature.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, this is to the Minister of Occupational Health with regard to the Edson gas well blowout. In the past 2 years, 6 separate oil patch accidents have resulted in death and injury to workers. Now, a recent tragic accident near Edson once again reminds all Albertans of the risk involved in working in the energy industry. Will the Minister report to the members of the legislature the information that the department has thus far obtained about the cause of the Edmonton, or the cause of the Edson gas blowout?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is indeed it was a very tragic accident that occurred on Friday night, and I know that all members of the Assembly would join me in conveying our deepest sympathies to those who've lost loved ones and those who have loved ones still in the hospital. But, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to visit the site on Sunday afternoon and to meet with a number of the people who are diligently at work trying to put out that well, and I could report to the Assembly that as of noon today, the well had been, the fire was out, the well was flowing freely. They were waiting for a capping blowout preventer to arrive, and all things going well, it was hoped by the Safety Boss company that is doing the work on the site that the well would be contained by end of business today. As for the cause of the accident, Mr. Speaker, the officials in the department have visited the site, met with a number of people, met with all of the people who are doing work in cleaning up the site and putting out the well, none of whom, of course, were on site at the time of the accident, all of those people having been injured or very unfortunately killed. And, Mr. Speaker, it's our intention in the days ahead to meet with those injured workers when they're able to speak with us, to find out from them exactly what happened at the well site, what went wrong, and come back to the government. The officials will come back to the government with advice and hopefully recommendations.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. No, the Minister, I'm sure, knows how complicated completing or servicing of gas wells is. So would a public inquiry, would the Minister consider setting up a public inquiry examining the circumstances surrounding the Edson gas well blowout, and would he commit to have one undertaken very quickly?
Mr. Speaker, I would prefer to receive a report, some advice, and all of the necessary information before making that decision. We have before us a number of alternatives, including the public inquiry approach. One of those is that the matter may be referred to the Occupational Health and Safety Council, which could undertake an investigation. Under Section 29 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Minister may appoint a board of inquiry to carry out a more formal investigation, or perhaps in consulting with my colleague, the Honourable Attorney General, under the Fatalities Inquiries Board, a procedure is established there. But, Mr. Speaker, all members of the Assembly should know that the investigators within the Occupational Health and Safety Division, working in close concert and cooperation with the Energy Resources Conservation Board, is carrying out such an investigation right now, a very thorough investigation, and following the advice contained within that report, then the government will make a decision as to what step, if any, is necessary to take next.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I'm sure that public inquiry covers all fields. Setting inspectors to investigate their own rules and their own regulation and their own work, I don't think works out too well, and the public deserves it. But with absence of that, then, would the government at least undertake, or should, in addition to this, undertake a thorough review of all safety standards governing Alberta's energy sector, given 6 separate oil patch fatalities in the last 2 years?
Mr. Speaker, I should clarify the honourable member's statement with respect to their own rules and procedures. Those procedures, Mr. Speaker, those rules, that law is law passed by members of this Assembly. And it is those rules, it is those regulations under which those inspectors operate. So let's make it clear, Mr. Speaker, that it is not anybody else's rules but the rules of this Assembly. But as for a special, anything special that the member is calling for, I can say 2 things. One is that those rules, those regulations, those procedures are under constant review, and in concert with members of the oil and gas industry, all subjects relating to safety are under constant review. But again, Mr. Speaker, I say that we are awaiting the the advice, the information, the results of the investigation carried out by occupational health and safety inspectors in concert with ERCB people.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, it's just not true. We don't see all the regulations. And I'd like to point out, Mr. Speaker, and further, when will regulations, for instance, be put in place to make mandatory the wearing of fire retardant clothing for workers servicing wells? Many companies make it compulsory, but this government still allows it to go by without. When are you going to put that measly little regulation itself in place?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat what I said earlier. I am waiting the advice of the investigation, and I appreciate the representation by the honourable member. I've received similar representations from a number of other people. And as a matter of fact, when I visited the site on Sunday, all of those who were involved in capping that well and putting out the fire were in fact wearing that fire-resistant equipment. But, Mr. Speaker, I await that information. I await that advice of the investigation.
Supplementary question, Leader of the Opposition.
Just following up on this particular accident, I believe this is to the Minister of Energy. He said that servicing wells, that there's no need for automatic inspections. I find that rather amazing sort of reaction. That the ERCB, is he saying that the ERCB decides maybe they need it, maybe they don't? And will he change that if this is in fact happening? Because obviously we've had an accident.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to the House earlier, that with regard to drilling rigs, there's a requirement for licensing and approval. Subject to, and I will check further into the requirements with respect to servicing rigs, but it's my understanding that it has not been a requirement for licensing the servicing of wells or approval for work to be done. And I think if the honourable member were to think about that for a while, he may find very good reasons as to why that would be the case.
Main question, supplementary information, briefly.
Supplement some information that I'd given previously, and just to challenge the honourable member opposite, the member for Westlock Sturgeon, with respect to seeing regulations, seeing laws. The laws are passed in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and the regulations pursuant to those laws are certainly our public documents, and so all of the operating procedures are visible, are public documents, and are available for all members to see.
Leader of the Representative Party, followed by the member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. Grain handlers at $15 an hour are striking the Saskatchewan wheat pool and also causing 5 other companies to lock out their workers at the Thunder Bay facility. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is the government prepared to call on the federal government to bring in legislation to stop this kind of irresponsible striking at this time and also stopping some of the irresponsible leadership of union bosses?
Mr. Speaker, I can share with the honourable member that we are telexing the Minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board today, Mr. Charlie Mayer, indicating our concern with the strike situation as it could not happen at a more inopportune time for our grain farmers.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate at this time what capability the port facility at either Vancouver or Prince Rupert has to take wheat that cannot be sent through the port at the lakehead?
Mr. Speaker, we did look into that in view of the strike situation at Thunder Bay, and I should share with the honourable member that it again proves the worthiness of this government's contribution towards the Prince Rupert grain terminal, in that there is a good, strong possibility that the majority of the grain can be handled at Prince Rupert. Presently, there is space available. For how long that situation will last, I truthfully don't know, but we are very hopeful that a good majority of the grain can be handled, as about 25% of the grain is exported through Thunder Bay, which is mainly barley from the province of Alberta, which is in the vicinity of 700 to 800 million tons.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate what his findings are with regards to the potential marketing of the 1986-87 crop, and specifically grain, from Alberta at the present time.
Mr. Speaker, again, that's very hard to determine. We're very much aware of the aggressive nature that the Canadian Wheat Board is taking in attempting to sell our grain, and we were also encouraged by the recent meeting that took place whereby Canada did participate to attempt to resolve the situation as it relates to the heavy subsidies from the United States and the European Economic Community, and we're hopeful that there will be some fruitful results from the meeting of the number of nations that would like to see a fair price for the grain prices.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. Could the minister indicate whether a coordinated affront to this current problem will be taken by the Western ministers, and will the minister from Alberta lead that front on the Government of Canada?
Maybe I could indicate to the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that last week when we did meet as agricultural ministers from across Canada, the Premier of Saskatchewan, Premier Grant Devine, who is also the agricultural minister, raised this issue in a very strong and forceful manner, whereby we do have a commitment, which was, I should share with him, which was endorsed by the Prairie provinces when it was brought forward as a proposal by Premier Grant Devine. We do have a commitment from the Federal Minister of Agriculture whereby he will have something concrete to present to the First Ministers when they do meet in September. I believe it's September the 17th.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture. I'm glad to welcome him back after his long absence. I was afraid that he had joined the Labour Review Committee. But Mr. Minister, what is...
Honourable Member Beauchesne quotes comments about members' absence or attendance in the Assembly is clearly out of order.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I thought there was a lack of attendance. I was just wishing him back as if he had been ill or traveling. But what, Minister, then what is the potential for the strike spreading to the West Coast? Is there any possibility of that? Is there any tie-in between the two unions?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would pay a little more attention to agricultural concerns, he would know that there was a meeting last week of agricultural ministers in Vancouver. It's obvious he is unaware of that, otherwise he wouldn't have been so flippant in his opening comments. But let me indicate to him that there is always a concern as it relates to the movement of our grain, and we are going to communicate in a very strong and forceful way to the minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, with the hopes of him trying to bring the sides together so that we can reach a meaningful agreement so that our grain can again be moved.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. In terms of facilitating the flow of Alberta grain through to the Prince Rupert Terminal, what action is this government taking to push for completing a rail link from Hines Creek to Dawson to facilitate this flow?
Mr. Speaker, maybe the Honourable Minister for Economic Development would like to supplement this, but maybe I could suggest to the Honourable Member how he could help in resolving this situation. Since they do have such very close ties with the National Farmers Union, it might be worthwhile if he chatted with the President, Mr. Wayne Easter, whereby he has completely endorsed the strike to the detriment of the grain producers, not only in our province, but the Prairie provinces, and if he could indicate to him to maybe encourage meaningful negotiation, it would have a great deal of impact.
How about the railway? Supplementary, member for Stettler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister for Economic Development. I wonder if he could indicate the capabilities at the Port of Churchill for taking up some of the slack that might be caused by the strike.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture responded with respect to the capacity of Prince Rupert to handle additional quantities of grain, and there is that additional capacity. There is also additional capacity at Churchill that has not yet been reached. I'm not precisely sure of the number of tons, but it would be in the neighborhood of 500,000 to 800,000 metric tons.
Main question, Vegreville, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and it concerns deficiency payments for Alberta grain producers. We've discussed this in the House before, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier has referred to it, saying that if there's a need, we'll push for it. The Ministers of Agriculture seem to be united in their support of this proposal in their conference in Victoria last week. I'm wondering what concrete, specific steps the Minister is taking to pressure the federal government for the need for deficiency payments this year.
As I'd indicated to an earlier question, Mr. Speaker, the proposal was again brought forward by Premier Grant Devine, who is the Minister of Agriculture for the province of Saskatchewan. We wholeheartedly endorse that proposal, but I must say in all fairness to the federal government, they wish to have an opportunity to assess the situation and develop priorities whereby how the money will be funneled and as to what avenues they should use, because there is a possibility, a strong possibility of a payment under the Western Grain Transportation program, or not, under the Western Grain Stabilization Program. There's also a possibility of a deficiency payment. We had also received the endorsement of the agricultural ministers to have the Farm Credit Corporation loans reduced to 9%. So he is giving consideration to all of these proposals, and again, they have to look at what avenues are available by way of finances.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, are the negotiations on the need for a deficiency payment tied in any way to negotiations with the federal government on removal of the PGRT?
Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, no. Maybe I could just make sure that in a previous question, too, I indicated that about 25%, I believe it was to the honourable member from the leader of the Representative Party, whereby about 25% of our grain was shipped through Thunder Bay, and I might have inadvertently said 700 to 800 million tons. It's 7 to 8 million tons.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, in the event that no federal action is forthcoming on this very serious problem, how long is the Minister prepared to wait before he would come up with some concrete proposal for a blended federal-provincial program on deficiency payments?
The question is entirely hypothetical. Final supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister assure the House that it is not in fact the case that the deficiency payment is being soft-pedaled by this government because of their commitment to a free trade agreement with the United States?
Mr. Speaker, that's utter nonsense, so I think everybody's aware of it. We've been very strong in our advocacy of making sure that our grain sector does receive proper support, and this government has been very active in their support for the grain sector by way of a number of programs that we have brought forward, and I'm happy to list a few of them. One is the fuel allowance, our fertilizer program, the feed market adjustment program. There's just a good many of them.
Member for Little Bow.
A question to the Minister of Agriculture. Despite many protests from many grain exporting countries, the U.S. continues to subsidize export sales. For example, they've just subsidized a sale to the Soviet Union from $13 to $15. Could the Minister indicate to the Assembly precisely what form has been has the Minister been advised of Canadian protests to the U.S. that have taken place up to date, and what is being proposed in the future with regards to protests relative to the American subsidizations?
Mr. Speaker, what has happened at the national level is our minister responsible has met with a number of the grain-producing companies to hopefully develop a consensus as to the best approach to take. I know there have been strong representations made by our national government to the President of the United States and a good many individuals in elected positions throughout the United States. The United States, I'm sure, is not happy with the heavy subsidy levels themselves, but they feel they have to do something to counteract the European Economic Community. We're hopeful through meaningful negotiations we can have both the European Economic Community and the United States withdraw some of their heavy subsidization for their agricultural products so that we can compete on an equal basis.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, to the Minister, and further to his comment that farm credit, the federal government was asked to reduce the farm credit to 9% along with what Alberta is doing. Could he tell us if they gave any kind of a deadline to the federal government in view of fast hemorrhage from our plan of maybe $200 to $400 million being flipped over from federal government loans into our own provincial loans? Did he give any deadline, or did he get any assurance how quickly this can be done so that our own money will go much further in helping out farmers?
No, Mr. Speaker, no deadline was given, and no deadline was requested specifically. The provincial agricultural ministers endorsed wholeheartedly a position by this government whereby the federal government reduced the Farm Credit Corporation loans to 9%. The federal minister had indicated he would give it consideration, and we're awaiting word from him as to what the results of those considerations are. It has been pointed out that the cost will be somewhere in the vicinity of $100 million to Farm Credit Corporation in the event that they do that. So again, as I said earlier, they have to weigh as to whether they can better use that by way of a deficiency payment or some other type of support for the agricultural sector, but they are giving it consideration.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. The Auditor General is appointed to review government spending to ensure that proper fiscal management and reporting techniques are adhered to by this government and that there is proper review of these expenditures by this legislature. The government is setting a dangerous precedent now by patently disregarding certain recommendations presented in the Auditor General's most recent report to this legislature. Why is the Treasurer continuing to utilize the tax expenditure technique despite the Auditor General's statement that it distorts the province's reported revenues and expenditures and weakens this Assembly's ability to review normal expenditures of this government?
Mr. Speaker, from time to time I've had an opportunity to comment on the tax expenditure process, and I've made it very clear to all honourable members that although tax expenditures are under some discussion both here and across other governments as to whether or not it is a reasonable way of reporting, we in the province of Alberta have found on numerous occasions significant numbers of opportunities to provide adequate and detailed information to support the revenue offsets, which is really in question here. It's not that we're trying to camouflage at all the disclosure. It's not that we're trying to mislead anyone as to what the cost of these programs is. It's simply that we're applying the consistent approach to dealing with these programs on a year-to-year basis so that some comparable analysis can be made. I should go on to say, Mr. Speaker, that we have provided ample opportunity to discuss the amount of money which be required in terms of the expenditure offset, and this is not at all a camouflage or a subterfuge. It's upfront reporting. There's an ample opportunity as well, Mr. Speaker, in the public accounts to review the amount of the cost of these programs, and that, of course, is handled from time to time by a committee of this Assembly. And so we should be very clear that it's not at all an underhanded approach. It's consistent with other governments, consistent with we've treated this, and I think it's a fair approach to the process.
Given that the Public Accounts Committee will review about 3 or 4 departments this year, it's hardly ample opportunity. Can the Minister please tell us how he justifies tax expenditures of $739 million reported in this Auditor General's report for 1983-84 and $550 million in 1984-85 without any review of this by this legislature? That's as much as 5 to 10% of normal operating government expenditures which are not reviewed by this legislature. Could you please justify that?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the member has misled the Assembly in that it's not being reviewed. Of course it's being reviewed. There's ample opportunity. I hear the member across the way speaking the last 2 weeks about an amendment going through in my the colleague, the Minister of Energy's legislation, where in fact he's had an ample opportunity to comment on what in fact have been tax expenditures. The Minister has offered abundant amount of information as to what the cost of these programs would be, and we from time to time are reported on a consistent basis what the impact of this would be on our budget. And so, of course, Mr. Speaker, there's an ample opportunity to discuss it, to debate it, and all members know the amount because the member just mentioned that $700 million would be spent. Therefore, he must be aware of the tax expenditure side.
Time for question period has expired. Might we complete this set of questions? Do you agree? Opposed? Supplementary
Thank you, Mr.
question.
Speaker. Has the Minister explained to the Auditor General why he will continue to count $2.5 billion of deemed assets already spent, deemed assets in the Heritage Savings and Trust Fund, despite the fact that the Auditor General has said since 1978 that this is wrong? And what is the Auditor General's reaction to that explanation?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask the Auditor General, Mr. Speaker.
Fourth. Could the minister please confirm that the practice of accounting for deemed assets in the Heritage Savings and Trust Fund is not only a problem to the Auditor General, but also contravenes the official generally accepted accounting principles which are sacred to the accounting profession of which you are a member? He is a member.
Well, Mr. Speaker, now I do recall the general accounting principles, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure all honourable members would appreciate it if I went on for about 15 minutes to go on and to explain to the honourable member just what is fundamental to the reporting process. I've attempted before, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that the deemed assets in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund are an important form of diversification of this government, a very important form of diversification for this province, and the successes are clear. I've gone on to note, Mr. Speaker, that we have made some major successes in diversifying irrigation, in electronics testing center, in health research, in the Heritage Savings Trust Funds. The people of Alberta know these are assets. They want us to account for them in this fashion. They have a continued future use. The people of Alberta, they are reported properly.
It's interesting when we come to the end of question period and we get an extension how quickly people seem to feel they've suddenly gone over into debate. Final supplementary, member for Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the government has been so good on reporting the value of tax credits and rebates and write-offs, etc., to this House, why didn't the government agree to question number 131 standing on the order paper in my name for 1981, 82, 83, and 84?
Sorry, out of order. Orders of the day.
Government bills and orders for second reading. Bill 17, Highway Traffic Amendment Act 1986, adjourned debate. Mr. Fox.